Was Ivan the Terrible an effective statesman who expanded the Muscovite lands and advanced the interests of the Russian state? Or was the Tsar a raging paranoiac who left his country in ruins? Sergei Eisenstein's films of the 1940s show us two sides of Ivan the Terrible. Part 1 shows a devout young autocrat who is determined to overcome division and unite the Rus lands. But the second part, banned by the Soviet state until 1958, shows Ivan's descent into paranoia as the Tsar destroys his enemies. The third part of Eisenstein's intended trilogy was never completed. Assuming full power at age 16 and taking Anastasia Romanovna for his bride, the young Ivan enjoyed a series of great successes during the first years of his reign. While his grandfather, Ivan III, was known as the gatherer of the Russian lands for his dramatic expansion of Muscovite territory, it was Ivan IV, Ivan the Dread or Ivan the Terrible, who began the conquest of the East, defeating Kazan and Astrakhan and beginning the absorption of the vast Siberian hinterland. To celebrate the victory of orthodoxy over Islam, Ivan destroyed Kazan's mosques and had a grand church constructed in Moscow known as St. Basil's Cathedral, whose architect was blinded to ensure that he could never build anything so beautiful ever again. But success in the East soon gave way to frustration in the West, where Ivan launched a military campaign whose goal was to establish a Russian presence on the Baltic Sea, then blocked by Sweden, Livonia, and Poland. Known as the Livonian War, the conflict failed to bring Russia the promised result and dragged on for a quarter century. It was during the Livonian War that signs of the Tsar's paranoia and possible madness became unmistakable. The death of his wife Anastasia in 1560 deprived the Tsar of a trusted companion. Meanwhile, the defection of his friend Prince Kurbsky to the Poles confirmed his growing suspicion of the boyars. At the height of the Livonian War in 1564, the Tsar moved to a monastery outside Moscow and declared that he was vacating the throne. The ploy worked. The people begged for his return, and the boyars granted Ivan the extraordinary powers he demanded in order to destroy his enemies. Boyars, whom the Tsar suspected of treason, were stripped of their properties, now transferred to Ivan's loyal servants. Countless boyars and minor princes were executed so that Ivan's power would remain unchallenged. But it was the Tsar himself who destroyed the 600-year-old Rurikid dynasty. His first son with Anastasia, named Dmitri, died as an infant. A second son, also named Ivan, was murdered by his enraged father in 1581, a moment that is hauntingly captured in a famous painting by Ilya Repin. A third son named Fyodor ascended to the throne after Ivan's death in 1584, but he died childless only 14 years later, thereby bringing the Rurikid dynasty to an end. The bitter Livonian War was over, but the damage to the Muscovite lands was so great that they were soon beset by famine and peasant flight. It was not long before Russia would descend into one of its darkest hours, the time of troubles. Such was the tragic legacy of Ivan the Terrible.